will triumph in the end.
What does it mean to be a conservative? This is the question that I've been wondering about for a very long time. When I was 4 years old, I remember cheering vaguely at the signs of the returns coming in showing that John Kerry lost. In 2008, I was a little bit sad that John McCain lost, but I was also excited for Obama. In 2010, I was outright ecstatic when the Tea Party candidates in the Republican Party seized the means of the House of Representatives. And in 2012, I remember staying up late to midnight, sad that Mitt Romney lost the election. So today I asked myself, am I a conservative? And what does it mean to be a conservative? So I read a few books. I read Barry Goldwater's Conscious Conservative. I read Phyllis Schlafly's A Choice Non-Echo. And I'm halfway through John Kasich's new book, Two Roads, Two Paths, I think it's something like that. It's one of those things where the question comes in of like, what does it mean to be conservative? Barry Goldwater says that being conservative is to always be having the question, are we maximizing freedom? Phyllis Schlafly seems to have a similar view early on, but then she talks a lot about religion and family values and standing up to the liberal change. I like liberal change. It's one of those things where it's progress. It's more people being allowed in the pie. It's the institutional barriers being broken down and people being allowed in. Goldwater, I think, would like that. I mean, he wasn't against civil rights. He voted against the Civil Rights Act. That's his famous thing. He was the only GOP senator outside of the South to do it, and he did it. He voted no on the CRA, and his defense was simple of his action, which was nowhere in the Constitution did it give the power to tell businesses what to do, and that's what he felt. So he voted against it, and that was his reasoning. Now, Goldwater, you could ask the question then, is Goldwater really for maximizing freedom? Or is he just for maximizing his own freedom? Is he sort of part of is conservatism then lodged in white privilege, I guess? And I think that's the issue we come across in progressive circles, the ones that I traffic at least, so that it's very much of conservatism is white privilege, or is at least based in a position of white privilege, and that people that vote for conservative candidates, for Republicans who are minorities, do it against their own interests. And what is their interest? I think we we conflate economic interests with all the interests of a person, right? In Goldwater's book, he talks about the difference between a conservative and liberal in that sense. A conservative takes in the full make of a man. The conservative recognizes that someone's spiritual being is connected and irrevocably intertwined with their economic being. And that makes some sense, doesn't it? Can we be politically free if we're economically not free? Can we be economically free if we're politically not free? What ensures that we can do what we want to do? I mean, to a reasonable extent. And I think that's a major point here in Goldwater's book, is that he believes that, the reason why he's against federal intervention in these things is because he thinks about, well, what if the intervention was the other way around? Are we legitimizing the usage of the use of federal intervention? And let's take this point to different areas. Let's take to abortion. 1972, Roe v. Wade. 7-2 decision. Supreme Court rules abortion is a right. Women have the right to an abortion, and the government cannot legislate against that. 46 states have their laws changed immediately. They get revoked. And that's great. But if we look at this, we set the precedent that the Supreme Court can overturn 46 state laws in one moment. It can decide that. And its argument can be based around the precept of, well, there's a right to privacy, not enumerated in the Constitution, but it's hinted at in other amendments. Now, Goldwater's response would be, that doesn't seem right. It seems a little bit like that we should follow the Article 5 procedures in the Constitution for amending the Constitution. And there's that sort of slow, deliberate view of his that he thinks that should be taken. That is a path forward, is a path that goes through the constitutional checks and grounds and backgrounds, and that pass muster. And Let's consider that for a second. Isn't that a little bit interesting? A little bit clear, a little bit nice that it's not an indirect answer. It's not him saying, "Hey, I oppose this." It's him saying, "Hey, if we want to do this, we have to do this right." It seems like a fair position there. And you can ask yourself, well, is he just a racist in sheep's clothing that's saying these things so that people can get away with doing terrible things? I don't think so. I mean, his wife founded a Planned Parenthood of Arizona in 1937. He helped his daughter get an abortion in 1955. He worked as a lobbyist for the Human Rights Campaign Fund in 1994, lobbying so that businesses in Arizona would not ask people, or not take into account their sexuality, and so that the military would allow openly gay service members to be serving in the military. That's socially liberal, isn't it? And yet, Goldwater thought fundamentally that's what it meant to be conservative. We look at Schlafly's A Choice Non Echo. Now, in this book, she makes a very big, interesting point of saying that the liberal internationalist order, big business, is conspiring against the conservative movement. Now, she makes a good case for that early on. Makes a good case for the nomination of the Republican president, or the Republican candidate, being sort of locked up by big business. But then she makes the point that it's one of those things where progress is really being pushed upon us by these groups. And that this sort of liberal, progress, Me Tooist attitude, I mean, it gets repeated. In one article by a website called American Conservative, not my website, in 2015 talked about the issue of the bathroom bill in North Carolina. Now, looking at the bathroom bill, it was supposed to make it so that transgender people would have to go to the bathrooms of their biological origin, or their biological gender. And immediately 100 companies came out against that. And that had a big effect. On it. And it's one of those things we're talking about, like big businesses behind social liberalism. So conservative activists feel like they're not being heard because of big business. Interesting. I want to come back to that. Now, a very important thing to consider here is to consider the government today. 3 branches of government, 50 states. So federally, we have a Republican majority in the House, in the Senate, and we have a Republican president. Now, Supreme Court, 5 Republican appointed justices, 4 Democratic appointed justices. 5 fairly conservative, one swing for liberal. And then on the state level, 32 of state legislatures are controlled by Republicans. That's pretty big. Do you know how many governors there are for Democrats? How many Democratic governors there are? Less than 20. How many Republican governors there are? More than 30. It's pretty skewed. So, we live in a conservative-controlled country. So, what do they want? And why are they not for abortion like Barry Goldwater? Why are they not for personal liberty in every situation? Now, it's because of the rise of the religious right. Now, Phyllis Schlafly really helped start this. In 1972, she started the whole Stop the ERA campaign, Stop the Equal Rights Amendment from even getting ratified. She stopped it. I'm not saying single-handedly, but without her, it probably would have been ratified. And then in 1976, she went full-on for Reagan. But who didn't go for Reagan there? Goldwater. Goldwater supported Gerald Ford. And in 1979, Jerry Falwell started the Moral Majority, trying to rekindle moral America and to, stop the social decay of the progress of the 1970s and 1960s. So that was the conservative movement under Ronald Reagan. It was about a Ronald Reagan campaign saying, I am going to appoint justices who will revoke Roe v. Wade. And so that was the Republican Party. That was the new conservative. That was the new establishment. It was the religious right, the evangelical. Barry Goldwater, he wasn't the evangelical. He was conservative. So tell me, what happened to him? What happened to his views? well, his views, weirdly enough, sort of merged into different things. Now, if we look at like the Democrats, there's a lot of the argument about how the government should have the right doesn't have the right to decide a woman's reproductive health. That's a pretty small government view. I'm not saying that's like the smallest government view, but like that's a view that limits government. That's pretty Barry Goldwater conservative. So where does the weird things come in? The weird similarities between the conservative movement and the progressive movement. Relation to big business. In Shafley's 280-page polemic, she talks about the effect of big business and how it's made it so the Republican candidate is always an echo of the Democratic candidate, not really giving voters a choice. It's the whole term, choice non echo. Now, let's look at Democratic messaging around, or at least the Bernie Sanders Democrat, or progressive. The belief was that Clinton was a corporatist shill. That was one of those things that was thrown around along the internet. And what was the thing thrown around at Nelson Rockefeller? That he was a corporate shill. That he didn't care about he didn't care about conservatism, he didn't care about people, he just cared about big business. That was the accusation thrown at the whole establishment. That they wanted to enact an American last policy. Why? Because of Phyllis Schlafly thought, because they were the ones who benefited from foreign aid, from large government spending. They were the ones who had the companies who benefited from the administering of that. There was sort of this accusation of corruption. This sort of big business conspiring against the government. I'm sorry. Doesn't that sound a little bit progressive? That sort of distrust of big business? So is that a part of what it means to be conservative? Or is it purely dominated by religion? By this sort of, I really wanted to hone down on that sort of similarity though, because on the website, I don't really talk about that, the similarities. I sort of consign myself to just talk about one thing, and that's about the two characters, their beliefs on the economy, their beliefs on social policy. That's important. But let's talk about Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan's four biggest influences, according to his brother, is Ayn Rand, Friedrich Hayek, Ludwig van Mises, I think, and Milton Friedman. So Ayn Rand, she's all about objectivism. She has this very small government minded and about the individual triumphing. That's a Goldwater thing. And the next three people, they're laissez-faire economists who are of the Austrian school. So what's the picture we make of Paul Ryan? Well, he's involved in faith, but at the same time, those sort of Goldwater views still survive in him. Definitely not the pro-abortion stuff. That's not him. The pro-abortion thing, no Republican has said anything in favor of that, because great book written by Jeffrey Toobin, The Nun, talks about Arlen Specter, a Republican senator from Pennsylvania. He was in line to become the head of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he made the comment, "I will not approve any judge who does not support abortion." He got completely blacklisted by the Republican Party, and they almost took away that committee assignment. He'd been part of the Republican Party for 40 years. They almost took it all away from him. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that a sign, though, of how the Republican Party's changed? Look at Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell, he's an interesting type of Republican. What are the things that he's famous from? Well, he's famous for his, refusal, his anger at campaign finance reform. That's his big thing, McConnell v. FEC. And then again, in 2010, he was a really big supporter of the Citizens United case. And the case there, again, is very conservative. And it's not Goldwater conservative. It's a little bit of like, I don't say, but it's the religious right. It's a little bit of that petering in there. And then let's look at Donald Trump. Yeah. The former Reform Party member, then Democratic Party member, then Republican Party member, and now Republican president. He doesn't really appear like a social conservative. He doesn't appear like a Goldwater conservative, though, or a Schlafly conservative. We don't see him saying stuff like, we talks a bit about family values, but at the same time, this is a third wife. That's really not traditional. And again, if we look at other things about him, it's one of those things where he doesn't fit into the sort of small government or into the Shafley. But where he does seem very conservative is where we look at Shafley's words. There is an American last foreign policy. What does Trump say? I'm America first. My foreign policy be America first and put Americans first. That's a big thing. That's sort of like a nationalistic statement. And yet, that's a part of what it means to be conservative to Shafley. It means to be proud of being American. And not really, it's sort of that exceptionalism message. And that message is not really shared too much by Democrats right now. The way he expressed it is very much of, like at the expense of other people. And it's like, well, that objectively, taking off our American glasses, that just isn't tenable, is it? I realize I ramble here in this video, but I want to keep the ramble in here because I think it covers an interesting thing about the Republican Party. It rambled. 1960, we had the majority of the establishment members, Nixon, Eisenhower, Stassen, Rockefeller. They were pretty moderate to liberal. They were all about, the federal budget increased under Eisenhower. Now we look at it today. Do we hear any Republican claiming liberalism? Do we hear any Republican appointing a judge like Earl Warren? I mean, or William Brennan Jr. I'm sorry. The two most liberal justices of our not our lifetime, but of Supreme Court history, appointed by a Republican. What is that? If you were looking for a more spirited defense of conservatism, or a very detailed look, I'm sorry if I couldn't offer that to you. But I do want you to offer this question to you. Do you think if being a conservative, about small government, about individual liberty, about taking your life in your own hand, about looking at people with the full idea of, what are they thinking, how do they feel? If that was your idea of being a conservative, would you be a conservative? Or do you think that that's all wrong? It's all white privilege, it's all racism, it's all not important. What is right today in 2017? We have a president who has, of yesterday, 34% approval rating, and we have a country that's divided more than ever. Eric Trump, son of the president, declared, I don't see Democrats as people. That's not normal. And it's one of those things where we have to ask ourselves, who are we? What do we believe? And what do we want in government? Do we want a government that switches between Republican policies and Democratic policies every 8 years? Or do we want a government that moves slower, that makes policies but sticks to them? I think that's where Goldwater really shines. Because by having limited government, we don't just have a more, constant government, but we also get more out of our government. We get more of an ability to do what we need to do. Look at the West. States like California, Washington, Oregon, they gained a lot of stuff because they didn't have a lot of regulations. Not really, actually. But let's look at the South. Tennessee, Toyota moved in there. A lot of car companies moved in there in general. But if you look at that and compare it to like Michigan, what's the difference? The lack of unions, the lack of regulations, the easy cost of setting up. If that's good, if that helps people get jobs, maybe that's not terrible, But in general, I want you to think about where are you on the spectrum, the political spectrum, and what do you really want from government? Because that's what it comes down to. And I know what I want from government. Actually, I don't know what I want from government. Right now, I feel pretty conservative, but yesterday I felt very liberal, and the day before I campaigned for a Democratic candidate for the state Senate. So, who am I? Constant question. But to those watching, probably just hiding, I want to say this. look at conservatism with open eyes and think a little bit about what's right. What's right for you? What do you want? What do you like to see in government? And don't let Glenn Beck, Ann Coulter, Milo Yiannopoulos take the turn. Because by doing that, it consigns us to a less interesting, a less good America. Bill Clinton in 1996 made a comment saying, "I come at my policies from a conservative perspective." Isn't that interesting? The centrist president, the king of triangulation, says this. So, I want to ask you all, think about your views and have a good day.